group of countries before the court, which is clearly politically motivated and can be inscribed in the strategy of trying to bring about a regime change. It involves foreign intervention in Venezuelan affairs based on false accusations and supposed crimes against humanity, something that has never happened in my country. In that context, it's worthwhile bringing to the attention of this General Assembly what was said by the ministers of foreign affairs of the non-aligned movement countries during its most recent meeting in July in Azerbaijan with regard to this question. And I quote, they said, "We note with concern the recent decision handed down by the International Criminal Court to proceed with an investigation into the presumed crimes committed under its jurisdiction in Venezuela based on the demonstrated cooperation with the ICC in this regard and the proceedings currently underway in Venezuela in exercise of its national jurisdiction and in keeping with its national obligations and international obligations as relevant. We further stress that this action is in violation of the principle of complementarity as set forth in the Rome Statutes, and therefore we request the ICC to avoid allowing its work to be politicized or used, and that would include as part of the loafer efforts or legal war, which just serves to promote specific agendas and undermine efforts to preserve the integrity of the Rome Statutes and the independence of the court, end of quote. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirms that the International Criminal Court is a court of last instance, and it establishes justice for serious international crimes rooted in national courts. National authorities, therefore, have the major responsibility of investigating and trying crimes which are defined as crimes in the Rome Statutes. The court is involved, the ICC is involved only when states are not prepared to or cannot act within their jurisdiction to undertake the national proceedings that correspond to them. I would like to conclude by emphasizing that my country, through the public ministry, which in addition to guaranteeing respect for constitutional guarantees and judicial proceedings, organizes criminal cases and proceedings when crimes have been committed, has been undertaking a series of reforms. It has adopted a series of innovative measures to ensure effective justice be served on national territory, and always seeking to provide reparations to potential victims of human rights violations. All of this is in full compliance with our national and international obligations in this area, and those that would include those that stem from the Rome Statutes, and in full correspondence with the spirit of cooperation, the Memorandum of Understanding undersigned between the ICC and my country. Moreover, we take this opportunity to recognize the work of public defenders who work at the ICC, whose efforts are fundamental to guarantee the proper functioning of the court. And we would also like to express our grave concern given the current labor situation of those public servants, and we therefore urge the government of the Netherlands, in its capacity as host of the ICC, to recognize their condition and return to the prior situation, prior to 2014, whereby the taxation was similar to this other civil servants of the ICC in equal conditions. We also call for preservation of the objectivity, independence, non-selectivity, and impartiality and transparency of the work of the court. And we should avoid that it be used to advance dark political interests that run against the spirit of the Rome Statute and that undermine both the primacy of justice and human rights. Along these ideas, we conclude by rejecting in the most categorical terms the recent statement made by the United States in this very room 2 days ago That statement shows once again the double standard applied in the area of human rights and its reiterated interest in politicizing the work of the ICC, whose judges and prosecutors have even been sanctioned due to the simple fact that they have tried to undertake investigations which are geared at specifically doing what other situations require, which is to provide justice and accountability for atrocious crimes. It's unthinkable, Mr. President, to try and supposedly promote great causes around the world while at the same time one chooses to turn a blind eye to the crimes committed by one's own nationals around the world, and then continue perpetuating over time impunity and a framework of impunity for the social genocide and oppression of an entire other people. This is not moral, and they do not stand on the moral high ground to make such statements about my country. It's enough to see so much shamelessness by the government of the United States and its satellites. It is time, therefore, to have justice and truth. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I now invite the distinguished representative of El Salvador to take the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Republic of El Salvador thanks the President for presenting the annual report on the work of the International Criminal Court. And with regard to the report, El Salvador would like to make the following remarks. The creation of the International Criminal Court was a crucial step in the evolution of international criminal law. This court reflects the commitment of the international community to guarantee that those crimes that are the most serious for the international community as a whole not enjoy impunity. 25 years after adopting the Rome Statute for the ICC, El Salvador takes note of the work of this important court in international criminal justice. We urge preservation, always, the institution as one that is permanent, independent, and of universal vocation. We further urge respect of the principle of complementarity in national jurisdictions. This principle makes it possible for the ICC to intervene when states cannot or are not prepared to try those who are responsible for serious crimes. In this regard, my delegation acknowledges that complementarity is essential to guarantee that there is no space for impunity and to adopt measures which are key for the protection of witnesses and victims. Mr. President, the relationship between the International Criminal Court and the United Nations is fundamental. The United Nations is the cornerstone of international cooperation, and the ICC has become a key and essential part of that structure. In that regard, my delegation takes note of the presentation of the reports A/78/322 on the work of the court in the years 2022 and 2023. We also take note of report A/78/321 on the expenditures and reimbursements received by the United Nations with regard to assistance provided to the ICC. We take note also of report A/78/320, which contains information which is relevant to application of Article 3 of the relationship agreement between the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. El Salvador encourages the promotion of capacity building in programs for legal reform and judicial reform supported by the United Nations in order to strengthen the institutional capacity and technical capacity of states parties to the Rome Statute, and also to train legal professionals geared to investigation and prosecution of international crimes. Capacity building clearly will make it possible to exercise the vital responsibility of states parties to the statutes to be able to investigate and try those crimes that are defined in the Rome Statute, and then, therefore, we believe it's opportune and very timely, the recommendations set forth in paragraph 71 of the report, A/78/322 in this area. Mr. President, we conclude reiterating my country's commitment to continue reviewing this item of the agenda, and we would also like to join in the co-sponsorship of the resolution that will be adopted after the plenary debate has been concluded. We will continue to provide follow-up to the work of the court that will make it possible to guarantee in its fulfillment access to international criminal justice so that it is respected and put in practice in a way that is lasting and in a way that prioritizes protection of human dignity of victims. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador, and I now invite the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation to deliver her statement.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, a number of delegations have spoken here in this room about those lofty ideals, combating impunity and equality of all before the law. We support these principles. They're the right ones. Historically, my country has championed these principles. It was one of the countries behind the Nuremberg Tribunal. Russia was one of the most active participants in the development of the ICC's Rome Statute. We voted in favor of its adoption, we signed it, and we even began ratifying it. Like many others, back then, we genuinely believed that this court, the ICC, can continue the glorious legacy of the tribunals which were established following World War II with a view to condemning Nazi and militaristic criminals. The ICC was supposed to investigate the most serious crimes under international law. It was supposed to do so impartially and effectively. Very high hopes were pinned on the court by many. Most of the effusive language contained in the resolution we're considering today dates back to the first few years after the ICC was established. Back then, commendatory reviews were often given in advance, and yet they have little to do with the current situation at the ICC and around it. Time and practice have shown that the lofty ideals of justice were not destined to become reality. Hopes, it turns out, were far removed from reality. The trajectory of the ICC's development, or rather of its degradation, was very similar to the dubious achievements of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which is famous for its clear anti-Serbian bent in its guilty verdicts. It's also known for whitewashing war criminals, including true butchers from a number of parties to the conflict. And it's only now that exotic courts of some sort established by the European Union, it's only now that they've started looking into these criminals. The ICC's main achievement is that it managed to outdo the odious ICTY in terms of how selective, partial, and politicized its work is. It's also excelled in brushing under the carpet the war crimes committed by its Western masters. Already back in Yugoslavia, Hague justice was a dirty word, and it's taken on new meaning thanks to the ICC. The ICC managed to refute the idea that combating impunity was a guarantee of reconciliation and conflict resolution down the line. The situation in Sudan and Libya is an excellent example of this. Experiments to transfer these situations to the ICC, these dossiers to the ICC, were not only unsuccessful, they meant a catastrophe for these countries, which stretched out over many years. Over the time that the ICC has been doing its useless work, we have a pathetic handful of decisions. The final verdict, well, you can count the number of final verdicts on one hand, on the fingers of one hand. Many cases simply fell apart at the investigations. stage, and billions of dollars were spent on these less than impressive results. The ICC's regular budget, a punitive machine wielded by the collective West, its budget is 3 times higher than that of the International Court of Justice. And this is without counting the hundreds of millions of dollars which Western countries funneled into that sham Ukraine case in the guise of voluntary contributions. Against this backdrop, the ICC's regular attempts to justify in front of the Security Council its flagrant years-long ineffectiveness on Libya and the Darfur justify this because it doesn't have sufficient financial resources. Well, that's a pitiful excuse. And yet, the West has certainly got bang for its buck. Since the ICC was established, 52 persons were charged. 47 of them were from Africa. That's a very interesting statistic, given that the worst, the bloodiest mass atrocities in modern-day history were committed by the West. An African colleague referred to the ICC as the International Colonial Court, and it wasn't in jest. The ICC has degenerated into a truly political tool for prosecuting those who have crossed the West. The neocolonialists, meanwhile, are enjoying total impunity, regardless of what they do, and this is in the best traditions of the so-called rules-based order instead of the law-based order. And examples abound. This court and its pet prosecutor, a British national, well, the West simply had to snap its fingers, and the court deprioritized an investigation of civilians dying at the hands of NATO, including women and children. Similar situations in Afghanistan, Libya, and Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of victims, and yet no one is held responsible. That's the justice you get at The Hague. And in a similar fashion, the ICC is making up cases as soon as its Western patrons tell it to. For instance, the arrest warrant issued against Mr. Gaddafi, which was cooked up in a matter of 3 days. These were shameful instances. Cases are fabricated against states which are not to the liking of the Western patrons of the ICC. The Gaddafi case was so outrageous that even the test tube wielded by Mr. Powell at the UN Security Council pales in comparison. And yet the ICC did its job. It dehumanized the Libyan leader, creating a fig leaf for the NATO aggression in the country. As a result, the country and its economy lie in ruins. Mr. Gaddafi was killed, and no one was held to account for this. Many perished from NATO bombs. Hundreds of thousands of people went up in flames during the Civil War, a war of all against all. Many drowned at sea, heading to Europe, looking for a better life. Or some did make it ashore and saw outrageous discrimination and inhumane treatment on the part of those who destroyed their home country. And who has been held responsible for this? We see total impunity at the ICC. So-called arrest warrants were issued for a number of Russians hastily just before the Russia-China summit. And this was a shameful circus. It doesn't have anything to do with justice. And the pretrial chamber actually had to replace the judge very quickly. In fact, when the prosecutor sent his request to the court, to the chamber's composition had been finalized. But who cares about procedural norms when you have political orders to execute? The prosecutor got his bonus, by the way. Just a few days before he sent his request to the ICC, his younger brother was released from prison. This was early release. His brother was a former British MP who was serving time because of a paedophilia crime. The issuance of warrants happened days before the donor conference in support of the ICC in London, and the sponsors there said that all of the money they were pledging should be spent exclusively on holding Russia to account. In other words, interested parties are paying for the proceedings they commission. Just think about this. What justice is there to speak of? The charges brought against Russians, that's a whole other issue. Not only are they groundless, there are violations of international law on the immunity of state officials. They're nugatory in legal terms and inhumane. These Russians are being accused of evacuating children who'd been left to their own devices from an area where hostilities are underway. So if we follow the ICC's logic, we should have left these children in the line of fire. This is how the ICC believes justice should be done. Against this backdrop, it comes as no surprise the ICC's position and the position of its patrons regarding the tragic events which have been ongoing now for 3 weeks. The civilian population has not been evacuated from the area where hostilities are underway. Thousands of children have died owing to indiscriminate shelling. Hospitals are being shelled regularly. Patients, doctors, and emergency workers are being buried under the rubble. Hundreds of people are suffering due to lack of water and medicine. Some UN system agencies have woken up and have started talking about possible war crimes. Where is the much wanted ICC? Where are the arrest wardrants? Or are those issued only when you save children, not when you kill them? The Office of the British Prosecutor is making some general political pronouncements, threatening taking Palestinians only to court. This again demonstrates the true nature of the ICC, its ideals, the purposes it pursues, and the interests, whose interests it's serving. Thus, the ICC's attempts to position itself as a body acting on behalf of the international community that look simply silly. The idea that has an international generally recognized mandate has nothing to do with reality. It's divorced with reality. This is a pseudo-court. And in fact, over 1/3 of UN member states are not members of it. They represent over 50% of the Earth.
National law came in response to tragedies we failed to prevent. We remember the names of these tragedies. They are the names of towns, cities, provinces, forever etched in our collective memory as open wounds, as stains on humanity's conscience, as reminders of what happens when the worst occurs and the many remain silent. In that list, Gaza's name is in bold. It appears several times. For the decades of military occupation, for 16 years of blockade, for 5 wars, and now more than ever, for 3 weeks, where the Gaza Strip has been besieged and bombed with no regard for the life of 2.3 million Palestinians who live there. The international community has failed those who were killed. It is failing the besieged, the wounded, the sick, the displaced. But thousands of lives hang in the balance. They can still be saved. There is no way to describe what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip as anything else than war crimes. Let me reformulate. There is no way to describe what is happening as anything less than war crimes. If you recognize these acts are committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population, these are crimes against humanity. If you recognize they are committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national group, then they are genocide. These are the choices: genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. Which one does any country here wants to try and justify? Is there any country still ready to evoke unconditional support for Israel while it is committing these atrocities, while it is occupying, colonizing, besieging, killing, and maiming. As member states of the United Nations, you pledged unconditional support to the UN Charter, to the rule of international law. Every nation has to choose where its loyalty lies. What is clear is that support for Israel in this war is incompatible with that pledge, with your obligation to uphold international law. International law, as a leading humanitarian NGO puts it, the humanitarian rule book has been thrown out, and polite pleas from politicians to minimize civilian fatalities are naive at best, and at worst seem blind to the unimaginable horrors already taking place in Gaza. International law is the standard against which all our actions are measured. Condoning double standards can only undermine and jeopardize the credibility and rule of international law. No exceptionalism for Israel, and no exception for Palestine and the Palestinian people. You know how what is happening in Palestine now is possible? One wonders, looking at these images, how is this possible? Not for one day, not for two, for days and weeks now. Live on TV screens being broadcasted around the world, massacres taking place. You know how it is possible? Read the Rome Statute. It has all the answers. It states, determined to put an end to impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes, and thus contribute to the prevention of such crimes. Impunity leads to recurrence of crimes. 75 years, not a single Israeli leader or commander or soldier has been held accountable for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. Not one. We joined the ICC almost 10 years ago and still await for justice to be delivered. There were countries to oppose us joining the ICC. There were countries to oppose the General Assembly seizing the International Court of Justice. How can they explain why Israel can never be held accountable in any form or any forum? This is not what history taught us. It taught us that our best chance against horrors is for the law to be upheld, for justice to be ensured, regardless of the identity of their victims and regardless of the identity of the perpetrators. That there is no justification whatsoever for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. None. The Israeli permanent representative stood in the Security Council and placed a yellow star on his jacket, evoking the Holocaust, while at the same time justifying the bombings that are killing Palestinian civilians by the thousands, children by the thousands. No one can instrumentalize the Holocaust to justify atrocities. No one. We honor the victims of the Holocaust and all victims by never justifying the killing of innocent civilians, by upholding international law for all. The Holocaust was one of the worst horrors humanity ever witnessed, and with other horrors led us to elaborate the very rules that are being breached today. The Charter, the Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. It led us to adopt the Rome Statute, 50 years too late, and build a court with a universal calling, not for one group against another, but for all humanity. Are we not part of that human family? Are Palestinian civilian lives less sacred? Does anyone here agree with Israel that we are subhumans? During each statement delivered here, every 5 minutes, a Palestinian child is killed. When we say every minute counts, we mean it. It's the difference between life and death for hundreds of people, for thousands of people. Palestinian families have lost 10, 20, 30, 40 of their relatives, killed en masse, several generations at a time. Some have disappeared from the face of the earth. You have families. You have grandparents and parents and siblings and children and grandchildren. Think of them. and then think of a single Palestinian family that have lost all of them, or of the child that survived all of the rest of his family and who has to go through life with that reality. Hundreds of Palestinian families have lost more than 10 members of their family. Nothing can justify this war going on for a single minute. Nothing. We have 2,000 Palestinians under the rubble. We can't reach them, can't save those who could still be saved, can't bury those who were killed. A mother said she could still hear her child under the rubble. She will never know if he could have been saved or not. She will never know. Never again means never standing idly by while atrocities are committed. It means never justifying such atrocities under any pretense or pretext. It means standing up to them and standing up for those enduring them. The General Assembly adopted a resolution grounded in morality and legality, calling for an immediate, durable, and sustained humanitarian truce, for upholding international humanitarian law and the protection of all civilians, for humanitarian access and aid to the Palestinian people throughout the Gaza Strip, for release of civilians held captive, for stopping and reversing forced transfer of population, for accountability, and for peace. We appreciate all those who voted in favor of that resolution and call on them to spare no effort to ensure its implementation. And we call on those who did not vote in favor of this resolution to review their untenable position. We appreciate every effort to get humanitarian aid in. We appreciate every effort to allow to save lives. But the only way for us to address this catastrophic situation underway is to stop the assault immediately. We call on the prosecutor who made an important visit to the region in the midst of this unfolding tragedy to uphold his mandate, and all states to help ensure accountability. We need your unconditional support to civilians, including children, to the humanitarian personnel performing in impossible conditions. 67 of UNRWA staff have been killed. Many doctors, many rescue teams have been bombarded. Many hospitals, many schools are under the bombs. There's no safe haven, no safe place in Gaza. People are asked to go south, and the south is under the bombs. 40% of those killed were killed in the south. Don't believe the lies. There is nothing called an evacuation order to protect civilians. Israel has admitted in this memo of the Ministry of Intelligence that the goal was the forced displacement of people outside of the Gaza Strip, outside of Palestine. The same goal pursued over 75 years. We have 75 years of experience to know Israeli goals. It is not to protect our civilians. It has never been to protect our civilians. It has always been to dispossess and displace our people. This is an unlawful order. Nobody should justify it. The protection follows the civilians. It's not the civilians who run after protection. They should be protected wherever they are. This order is a death sentence for many who cannot leave where they are. There is no shelters, no infrastructure to receive them. There is not a single safe place in Gaza. We need your unconditional support to the wounded and the sick, to the law, to humanity, to a reality where no Palestinians are killed and no Israelis are killed, where our rights are no longer denied, where families are reunited in life, not death, where we are all able to live in peace and security. Only one path can lead us there. No one should obstruct it. All should help us on it. It is the one we identified when we joined the ICC with 3 simple words: justice, not vengeance. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished representative of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/78L6 entitled Report of the International Criminal Court. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegation listed on the L document, the foreign countries have also become co-sponsors of A/78/L6. Albania, Andorra, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Barbados, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Botswana, Bulgaria, Cabo Verde, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Czechia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Estonia, Fiji, Finland, France, Gambia, Georgia, Germany, Ghana, Greece, Guatemala, Honduras, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Madagascar, Malawi, Malta, Marshall Islands, Mexico, Montenegro, New Zealand, Nigeria, North Macedonia, Norway, Paraguay, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Republic of Moldova, Romania, Samoa, San Marino, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, Ukraine, United Kingdom, United Republic of Tanzania, and Uruguay. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/78/L6, please signify by pressing the microphone button. I see Gabon, if the delegation of Gabon turn off the microphone button unless there is any other change. And I see Congo. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/78/L6, please signify. Those against? Abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/78/L6 entitled Report of the International Criminal Court. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
Ready? The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 115. Against, 6. Abstentions, 31. Draft resolution A/78/L6 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, May I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Brazil.
Mr. President, as I mentioned during the debate, the difficulty to achieve consensus for the first time in this annual resolution highlights the need for us to reflect on how we may overcome the current pressing challenges faced by the International Criminal Court, rather than simply disregarding them. And this is why Brazil has chosen to abstain. Achieving universal adherence, addressing concerns related to partiality, selectivity, and double standards, ensuring effective state cooperation, fostering coherence within the international legal system, and rectifying geographical imbalances within the ICC's institutional structure are some of these critical challenges. It is essential that the ICC conducts a thorough self-assessment of its current activities as outlined in its annual report, addressing these and other concerns to further its noble mission of ending the impunity for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. In closing, Mr. President, allow me to reiterate Brazil's unwavering commitment to international law and international justice as underscored in my remarks during this debate. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Brazil, and I now invite the distinguished delegate of Israel to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel was an early advocate for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. However, Israel has decided to abstain for the reason it has expressed in previous years when it disassociated itself from this resolution. As a democratic state based on the rule of law, and as the nation of the state of the Jewish people, we remain committed to ensuring that the perpetrators of mass atrocities that deeply shocked and conscious of humanity are held accountable. In that context, Israel has already stated that it has launched a national investigation in relation to the barbaric and ongoing crimes committed by Hamas against Israeli children, women, and men in a murderous terror attack that started on October 7th, 2023, and will seek to hold those responsible to account. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Israel for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my delegation chose to join the states that voted against the draft resolution and the states that clearly expressed how dismayed they are from the unprecedented politicization of the performance of the ICC. My country was among the states that effectively participated in the Rome Conference in 1998 and contributed in an important manner in the drafting of the statute of the court. We were among the first states to sign the statute of the court. However, the stumbling performance and the selective approach by the ICC since it was established was the reason for not signing the statute, despite the fact that the work of the committee was simultaneously aligned with some of the most heinous and serious crimes committed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and occupied Palestine. The record of the court was full of failures of betraying the victims of the Iraq and Afghanistan invasions, as well as the violations by Israel, the victims of Abu Ghraib, among others. Today, 25 years after the adoption of the statute of the court, we became confident that we were right to take that position against the court and not to ratify its statute. Mr. President, It is truly regrettable for us to see the fact that the court has been taken hostage by directives from Western states, including from some Western states, including the United States, that have ratified the statute, and to draft decisions and legislations to obstruct the work of the court. We all remember the ASDA, the Act to Protect the servicemen of the United States, known as the Lehigh Service Law. Have these states rediscovered the court, or along with their Western allies decided to redefine the court by turning it into a tool to bring pressure to bear and to bring coercive diplomacy in the face of certain states? These states are, by coincidence, African states. What a coincidence. Most of the countries that were targeted were African states, as if those gross violations are a trademark of African leaders. This has happened despite the fact that history taught us otherwise. History taught us that the most heinous crimes committed in Africa were perpetrated by the West and continues to perpetrate it against Africa and the peaceful people of Africa. Things did not stop there. The court has turned recently, or the speaker says, started issuing subpoenas on demand, international subpoenas on demand. And this is a new service. These are new customer services. And even if these subpoenas were to face senior officials from non-member states, this is against the rules of international law on sovereignty, personal and otherwise, agreed upon by customary law and confirmed by the decisions of the International Court of Justice. In full view of the world and on TV screens, we witness an act of genocide that continues against a whole people in Gaza. Where is the criminal court while all of this is taking place? The court decided to remain silent or only to make declarations. The court decided to stand idly by while children are killed, where hospitals are targeted, and even those who are already dead are targeted. This is exactly the position that was clearly understood due to the court's position towards Palestine. As for encouraging member states to adhere to the court, it would be tantamount to being asked to be partners to the crime and to remain silent while these crimes are committed. Most of the leaders and the Israeli war criminals who clearly declare that they are determined to annihilate civilians, to destroy Gaza, and to deal with the Gaza people as human animals, all of those, I say, have citizenships of member states in the court. All of those, I repeat, have citizenships of countries in the court in addition to their own. And this is against the court's statute in rule number 12. So why won't these states who claim to be protecting international justice, why don't they submit them to the court? Why doesn't this apply to ISIS? Because most of the ISIS members are citizens of these states. My answer is because this does not serve the interests of these states that are partners in the crimes committed by the Israeli occupation and those of ISIS. We do not exaggerate when we say that silence by the court towards the crimes in Gaza makes the court a partner in the crime. And it is a partner because it did not move. It was a partner when it divided the Sudan, in destroying Libya, and in failing the victims of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and Afghanistan. In conclusion, sir, what I said before are not claims. Those are facts confirmed by history. And therefore, talking about the universality of international criminal law, which the court is supposed to be representing, or that is what it was supposed to have represented, is something that includes an exaggeration. We might be better off admitting that the selective performance and the systematic targeting that now guide the work of the court has ridden the concept of international justice from credibility, and therefore we are now with the justice of the victors, of those who took revenge, and those who financed. Thank you.
May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 74?
Israel is asking for the floor.
The Chair recognizes the distinguished delegation of Israel.
Thank you, Chair. We regret that once again the Palestinian delegate has chosen to exploit this esteemed platform and exhaust its vulnerable time.
You ask.
Would the delegate of Israel please indicate whether the statement he is in the process of making constitutes a right of reply?
We want to have a right of reply, Mr. President.
The exercise of the right of reply has been requested. May I remind members that statements in the exercise of the right of reply are limited to 10 minutes for the first intervention and to 5 minutes for the second intervention, and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now call on the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. We regret that once again the Palestinian delegate has chosen to exploit this esteemed platform and exhaust its valuable time by sharing misleading information and inflate numbers, seemingly running out of valid legal arguments. We should all remember there is no law without facts, and the facts are very clear. Hamas, the genocidal terrorist organization, started this war, and Israel has the legal and the moral right to protect its citizens, period. Hamas is the ruler of Gaza Strip. Hamas is behind this attack, and it will be held accountable for the ramifications of its actions, period. In this asymmetric lawfare, everything is asymmetric. There is one side, a democratic state, which abides by the international law and does everything within its power to minimize civilian casualties, and on the other side, there is a genocidal terror organization which blatantly ignores and violates international law time and again, and strives to maximize the civilian casualties on the Israeli side as well as on the Palestinian side. If the Palestinian delegate and their supporters' concerns are genuinely for the well-being of Palestinians in Gaza, we suggest they address Hamas, which hides in the tunnels under hospitals and whose actions and use of civilians as human shields significantly impacts the situation on the ground. The right thing to do is to condemn Hamas. If they won't condemn Hamas, as they haven't been refusing to do since the massacre on October 7th, perhaps it would be better if this forum would focus on developing the international law rather than being influenced by those who wish to spread false information and political agendas. Thank you, Mr. President.
May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 74. It is so decided. Members are reminded that the 43rd plenary meeting of the 10th Emergency Special Session will be held immediately after the adjournment of this meeting. The meeting is adjourned. The 43rd plenary meeting of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly is called to order. Oh, it's empty. The General Assembly will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the Rest of the Occupied Palestinian Territory, to resume the debate on the item pursuant to the decision taken at the 40th plenary meeting on 27th October 2023. Can I encourage delegates to, if you need to consult, can you do so outside the room so that we can hear the delegates who will make presentations this afternoon? I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to salute you using the greetings of Islam, the religion of peace and mercy. Peace be upon you, so is God's and His blessings. Allow me to begin by extending our deep respect and gratitude to the 121 states that honorably stated their position last Friday and decided not to stand idly by while genocide and collective punishment were visited upon our defenseless civilian Palestinian brothers. Please do not forget that on the same day when you decided to stand by what you deemed as right and made your positions known, challenged criminality, atrocities, and heinous crimes committed by the Israeli occupation forces, they declared the start of their ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. They did not stop there. They doubled their strikes and bloodthirsty violence against innocent civilians who were mostly women and children who committed no sin to deserve this fate. Does the world still believe that what has been unfolding is in self-defense? Are there among you those who continue to remain indifferent in the face of an unfolding genocide playing live daily before your very eyes? Do you accept that an occupation entity unilaterally rides roughshod over the rules and principles of the UN Charter, international law, and international humanitarian law? I just wonder how audacious are those who turn a blind eye to atrocities and fail to condemn them. You dragged this organization to an abyss the likes of which we have never seen before because of your double standards and selectivity in applying the law. Mr. President, Kuwait's position vis-à-vis the crimes committed before our own eyes is based on three basic principles. First, an immediate ceasefire. Second, opening border crossings and providing urgent access for relief humanitarian assistance supplies. Third, rejecting any attempt to initiate or initiative to forcefully displace the Palestinian people to areas outside their occupied territories. On the application of law, I would review with you the actions of the coward occupation forces violating the interests of civilians. And I say coward because this is against because of the actions of the Israeli forces, who have no sin other than they were created Palestinians. We see daily violations of the principles of international law, international humanitarian law, in addition to many decisions and resolutions adopted by the Security Council and the General Assembly, the countless decisions. So I would like to review with you the violations against the civilians. Some of the most difficult scenes that we are seeing daily is killing innocent children, young children who only hope to go to schools to play with each other. They have committed no crime whatsoever. And I would like to draw your attention here to the statements declared made by Save the Children 2 days ago, to the effect that the number of children killed in Gaza in the past 3 weeks alone exceeded the annual number of children killed all over conflict zones in the world since 2019. Over 3,257 children have been killed since October 7. Let's review together some of the resolutions by the Security Council that are daily violated by the occupying authorities for the past 25 days. First, Security Council Resolution Resolutions 1261 of 1999. It was the first resolution of its kind to be tabled before the Security Council, condemning targeting children in armed conflict, forcibly displacing them, attacking targets protected under international law, including in areas in which children are present in large numbers. In addition to guaranteeing access by humanitarian officers and providing humanitarian assistance in a safe and complete manner without any obstruction to children affected by armed conflicts. The resolution also stresses the importance of the safety, freedom of movement, and security of UN staff and associated staff, and stressing the responsibility by all states to put an end to impunity and to their commitment to bring those responsible for the gross violations of the 1949 conventions to justice. Second, Security Council Resolution 1998 of 2011. This resolution condemns attacks against schools and hospitals and obstructing access to humanitarian assistance by parties to armed conflicts and other violations of international law against children in cases of international conflict. Third, Security Council Resolution 2286 of 2016, which condemns acts of violence, strikes, and threats against those who've been injured, who are sick, medical crews, and those who provide humanitarian assistance, who are exclusively undertaking medical tasks and against their means of transport and equipment, as well as against hospitals and other medical facilities. Fourth, Security Council Resolution 2347 of 2017 that condemns the destruction of cultural heritage represented in destroying religious sites in armed conflicts. Fifth, Security Council Resolution 2417 of 2018 about all Israeli violations in all of our meetings. The misinformation campaigns by the occupation authorities require that we respond with unrefutable facts. It has become clear that when the word of what's right and justice pains them, and the fact that the people of the world stood beside the Palestinians is something that terrorizes them. Therefore, we stress the need for the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions on the protection of civilians, where such resolutions include uncontroversial languages, and therefore it's illogical for us not to implement them today. It's as if those who drafted these resolutions would know the criminal acts that will pursue in the future, and such resolutions seem as if they were custom-made to respond to the gross violations perpetrated by the occupation forces. Mr. President, what the Secretary General said pained them when he said that what happened in Gaza on the 7th of October was not born out of a vacuum. So they started attacking him, asking him to resign, and they declared that he's not welcome to enter to their occupied entity. I would like to tell you, Mr. Guterres, you are the moral compass of this organization. We have only listened to arguments that highlight what is right, no matter how bitter the facts were. You should be welcome to any place on earth, any place that does not fear the words of rights, justice, and honesty. This only confirms what we already know. That is, this occupying power does not know what honesty is, what right is, and only promotes empty words and fabrications. The times has come, and we will not repeat what we have said over the last 56 years. The violation, killing, and violence perpetrated by the occupier has no place in our world today. Our only way forward would be the achievement of a full and comprehensive peace by the implementation of resolutions adopted in international contexts and the agreement to the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 for the establishment of the State of Palestine, with Jerusalem as its capital on the lines of June 4th of 1967. We are all for the above. Therefore, we are not going to go back to where we were, to square one. The time has already passed. This is not because we refuse to address the situation. The world knows that the State of Palestine did not reject political negotiations. However, ignoring international legitimacies according to the interests and to the changes in views of those who are in command on the other side is something that we will not accept, and we will not ignore. We are states, and we have our own influence. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you the following. You tried everything. You would like. I would like to say to the occupying power, you were treacherous, you fought, you struck, you killed, you forced populations out, you displaced, you detained, and you imprisoned. You burnt everything before you. You only have one choice, which is the only choice that would rid us from this circle of violence that you have imposed for the past 56 years, which is to end occupation and to leave the Palestinian occupied territories. Our heart is broken. Our blood is boiling. Get out of our land. Leave our land. We don't regret your departure. In conclusion, our Palestinian brothers, you are free, you are the people of steadfastness and of struggle. We take pride in you, in your steadfastness and your courage. That is unprecedented. We will make every effort to show that you are in the right, and we will spare no effort to stand by your side. You are an inspiration. You have been the symbol of dignity, and I hope that you would be protected and peace be upon you, my distinguished delegates.
أشكر المندوب الدائم لدولة
I thank the permanent representative of the state of Kuwait, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of the Russian Federation.
President, distinguished colleagues, the events of the last few weeks in the area of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have left probably no one on this earth indifferent. All of our hearts ache as we look at the heart-rending stories of human suffering. And the parties are shifting blame for the suffering from one to the next, while the civilians in Israel and Palestine continue to perish. Our mission receives tens of messages every day from Israeli citizens, Palestinians, and the diaspora. These people write to us about their loved ones in the conflict zone, urging us to do something, anything, to put an end to the violence. First and foremost, they are calling for a ceasefire, for hostages to be released. They're calling for the necessary humanitarian assistance to be delivered. These are thousands of horrendous individual stories, thousands of lives. I'd like to use the opportunity afforded by this rostrum to assure all those who have messaged us, who have contacted us, to assure them that we hear your pleas and we're doing everything within our power so that the international community can take steps to resolve this most acute crisis. We'd like to stress yet again that the violence visited upon civilians, Israeli civilians, since the start of October has no justification. We categorically repudiate and condemn them, all terrorist acts. We extend our condolences to all those who lost loved ones in Israel, Palestine, and in other countries. We demand the release of all persons held captive. Unfortunately, this tragedy didn't appear out of thin air. The protracted Israeli-Palestinian conflict was and remains at the epicenter of all Middle Eastern upheavals. For over 70 years, the Palestinian issue has remained unresolved, and it has prompted regional and international divergences of opinion. It's been exploited as an ideological motive by terrorist and extremist organizations in different parts of the world. What's more is, the fact that the issue is unresolved has resulted in untold suffering on the part of the Palestinian people, the Israeli people, Arab states, and all of the many Palestinian diasporas living therein, including refugees who've been forced to remain in camps for decades and decades. This state of play has been exacerbated over the last few years because Washington has acted alone, separately from our collective efforts, from agreed efforts. It's acted alone, imposing on Israel's Arab neighbors and economic peace without settling the Palestinian issue. We've reached a situation whereby there are now individual unilateral initiatives which not only ignore but actually undermine the international legal basis for the settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict endorsed by the UN and enshrined in UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. The US has attempted to turn a blind eye to the ongoing construction of Israeli settlements on the occupied territory. It's recognized Israeli sovereignty over the occupied Golan Heights. And what we've now seen is the Americans calling for an end to the settler violence being foisted upon Palestinians in the West Bank. As a result, Palestinians who see no way out, and we see a conflict that's unprecedented in terms of its scope and risks spilling over to the entire Middle East. Over all these years, we've been warning about the fact that this course has no prospects. It's dangerous and can result in tragic consequences. This new outbreak of violence proves what we've said many times before. A normalization of Israel's relations with Arab states, although of course that would be positive, cannot occur at the expense of the Palestinians. It cannot result in a lasting stabilization of the situation unless we resolve a key issue in the Middle East, that is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. This approach, as we saw for ourselves when on the 27th of October, here in this chamber, we adopted the Jordanian resolution. This approach is supported by the leadership of all Arab, Muslim, and many other states. It's a paradox that on the one part, the entire international community has recognized that Israel's activities in the occupied Palestinian territory are illegal because they're at odds with UN Security Council resolutions and the provisions of international law. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, our Western colleagues in their statements prefer to simply forget that this unprecedented escalation on the ground is also a consequence of the settlement policy of West Jerusalem, as well as the systematic restrictions West Jerusalem has placed on the Palestinians' ability to freely visit their holy sites. We're delighted that Antonio Guterres did not shy away from flagging this, speaking during Security Council deliberations on the Middle East on the 24th of October. He noted that the current uptick in violence did not happen in a vacuum. As a result, he was immediately subjected to irate and undeserved criticism on the part of Israel, which preferred to see history starting from a blank page, to see history begin on the 7th of October 2023. Colleagues, we'll all have to return to the root causes of the conflict. We'll have to put the Israeli-Palestinian settlement process on an agreed track. However, right now we need to immediately cease fire and put an end to the bloodshed. This should be obvious to all, you'd think. Unfortunately, our Western colleagues at the Security Council are continuing to torpedo any efforts to de-escalate the situation on the ground. They continue to block the UN Security Council's attempt to urgently take measures to immediately normalize the situation, first and foremost to enact a ceasefire. This is what common sense dictates. What's more is, it's what humanitarian organizations in Gaza are calling for. Clearly, the fully fledged ground operation Israel has begun in Gaza can turn not just into a tragedy for 2 million Gazans, it can also trigger a regional conflagration. You'd think that everyone understands just how dangerous this scenario is, and yet it's only Washington which won't listen, which hypocritically is trying to pursue its own regional agenda, politicizing UN Security Council draft resolutions, trying to pass them, but we did not allow it to pass, nor did China. Our US colleagues are trying not just to divert attention from the failures of their policy to shift blame when it is itself at fault. They are accusing Iran, Hezbollah, and Gazans of all of the world's ills. They're also trying to legitimize all this, legitimize the ground operation through the Security Council. We remember the no-fly zone in Libya in 2019 when our Western colleagues had no trouble interpreting UN Security Council Resolution 1973 to their own benefit, waging an aggression on Libya. The UN Security Council does not have the right to grant this kind of carte blanche. President, I'd like to highlight that when we condemn the killing of Israeli civilians and foreigners in Israel, when we do that, we still cannot turn a blind eye to what Western Jerusalem is doing. They're committing flagrant violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. Entire neighborhoods are being razed to the ground. According to information, we have over 8.5 thousand people have been killed in the enclave. Many of them, most of them, are women, children, and the elderly. Indiscriminate airstrikes have taken over 3,000 lives. Young Gazans are lying there under the rubble. Over 2,000 of them. Half of them are children. As a result of the latest strike on the Jabalia refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, over 400 people died. The number of losses amongst UN personnel is staggering. 64 people have been killed, 22 have been injured, and 42 UNRWA objects have been destroyed. The number of IDPs in the Gaza Strip stands at 1.6 million people. As a result of the bombing of the Strip, 9 hospitals are completely out of commission. The rest of the hospitals are facing acute shortages of medicines. Over 100 people, including over 300 people, including many of them children, have also perished in the West Bank. Against this backdrop, Israeli officials are making insulting pronouncements regarding all Palestinians, talking about the collective responsibility of an entire people, responsibility for the actions of Hamas. Israel's orders to evacuate over 1 million people are pronouncements that do not hold water. Also, the total blockade imposed by Israel on the Strip is unacceptable. It's cut off from the rest of the world. This blockade has provoked panic amongst these frightened people who've lost all hope. It's undermined the work of medical and emergency staff and will inevitably result in greater civilian casualties. You cannot vanquish terrorism using these means. We call on the parties to the conflict to immediately put an end to the bloodshed, to give mediators an opportunity to seek a diplomatic solution, including the swift release of hostages. We will have to go down this path sooner or later. The question is how many innocent people will die until the decision is taken to do so. President, colleagues, we cannot but mention the hypocrisy of the US and their allies. They, in other completely different situations, are issuing appeals for the respect of humanitarian law, establishing investigations, committees, imposing sanctions on those who are actually genuinely only resorting to force as a last resort to put an end to years of violence. And yet today we're witnessing horrific destruction in Gaza, greater than all the West criticizes in other regions, greater by many orders of magnitude. We're seeing strikes on humanitarian objects, including hospitals, thousands of children dying, horrific suffering on the part of civilians under conditions of a total blockade, and yet the West remains silent. The only thing they can muster is continued pronouncements about Israel's supposed right to self-defense, although as an occupying power, it does not have that power, as confirmed by the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice handed down in the year 2004. We hope that these blatant double standards are obvious to our colleagues in the Global South. As for Israel's security, and we recognize its right to ensure its security, this security can only be fully guaranteed if we resolve the Palestinian issue on the basis of relevant UN Security Council resolutions. We do not deny Israel the right to fight terrorism, but fight the terrorists. Don't fight civilians. Otherwise, you yourselves are taking the side of evil. You are deploying the same methods evil deploys. The Jewish people suffered persecution for many centuries, and the Jewish people should know better than anyone that the suffering of ordinary people, innocent lives lost, in the name of blind retribution, will neither restore justice nor bring the dead back to life nor console their families. Islam, Christianity, Judaism are united in recognizing the value of human life, which belongs to God. God giveth, and only God is entitled to take it away. In these very testing times, the Russian Federation is taking active measures to immediately resolve the crisis. We are very much in favor of an ongoing negotiation process at an endorsed UN forum, following which we should